The stars burned cold and distant, their light barely piercing the thick atmosphere of the dying planet. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, the ground cracked and barren, as if the world itself had given up. In the shadow of a crumbling spire, a lone alien stood, its 4 arms trembling as it clutched a small, glowing orb to its chest. Its scales, once vibrant and iridescent, were now dull and cracked, reflecting the despair that had settled over its kind. The alien's name was Kael'thar, and it was the last of its kind. Kael'thar species, the Zyn'thari, had once thrived on this planet, their civilization stretching across the stars. But war, famine, and a plague that ravaged their population had reduced them to a handful. And now, as the planet's core cooled and the atmosphere thinned, Kael'thar was the only one left. Its children, its precious, fragile offspring, were all that remained of the Zyn'thari legacy. The orb in its hands contained them. Thousands of tiny, embryonic Zyn'thari, suspended in stasis, waiting for a chance to live. But Kael'thar knew it could not save them alone. Its time was running out, and the planet would soon be uninhabitable. It needed help. It needed humans. Humans. The word left a bitter taste in Kael'thar's mouth. The Zyn'thari had once viewed them as primitive, violent, and unpredictable. But in recent years, the humans had proven themselves to be more than that. They were resilient, resourceful, and, most importantly, compassionate. Kael'thar had heard stories of humans taking in refugees, rebuilding shattered worlds, and even adopting alien children. If there was any hope for the Zyn'thari, it lay with them. With a heavy heart, Kael'thar activated the beacon. The orb pulsed with light, sending a signal out into the void. It was a desperate plea, a cry for help that would take years to reach the nearest human colony. But Kael'thar had no other choice. It could only hope that the humans would hear its call and come. Years passed. Kael'thar's body grew weaker, its scales falling away as the planet's atmosphere thinned. It spent its days tending to the orb, whispering words of comfort to the unborn children within. It told them stories of their ancestors, of the great cities that once stood, and of the hope that one day they would live again. And then, one day, the humans came. The ship descended from the sky like a falling star, its engines roaring as it touched down on the cracked ground. Kael'thar watched from the shadows, its heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. The humans stepped out, their figures strange and unfamiliar. They were smaller than Kael'thar had imagined, their skin pale and soft, their eyes filled with curiosity and determination. One of them, a female with short, dark hair, approached Kael'thar. She held up her hands, showing that she was unarmed, and spoke in a soft, soothing voice. "We received your signal," she said. "We're here to help." Kael'thar hesitated, its grip tightening on the orb. It had spent so long alone, so long without hope, that hardly knew how to react. But the human's eyes were kind, and her voice was gentle. Slowly, Kael'thar stepped forward, holding out the orb. "Take them," it said, its voice trembling. "Take my children. They are all that remains of my kind. Please give them a chance to live." The human nodded, her expression solemn. She took the orb carefully, cradling it in her arms as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. "We'll take care of them," she promised. "We'll give them a home." Kael'thar felt a wave of relief wash over it, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, aching sadness. Its children would live, but it would not be there to see them grow. Its time was over. "Thank you," it whispered, its voice barely audible. "Thank you, humans." The human reached out, placing a hand on Kael'thar's arm. Her touch was warm, comforting. "You don't have to thank us," she said. "This is what we do. We help. We protect. We care." Kael'thar nodded, its vision blurring as tears filled its eyes. It had done all it could. Its children were safe. It could rest now. As the humans prepared to leave, Kael'thar watched from the shadows, its body growing weaker with each passing moment. It felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that its children would live on, that they would be loved and cared for by these strange, compassionate beings. And as the ship lifted off, carrying the last hope of the Zyn'thari into the stars, Kael'thar closed its eyes and let go. The human colony on New Eden was a bustling, vibrant place filled with life and laughter. The air was clean, the sky was blue, and the ground was fertile. It was a far cry from the dying world the Zyn'thari had left behind. In a small, quiet room at the edge of the colony, the orb sat on a pedestal, its light pulsing gently. The humans had worked tirelessly to create a safe, nurturing environment for the Zyn'thari children. They had built incubators filled with nutrients and warmth, and had carefully transferred the embryos from the orb into their new homes. The dark-haired human, whose name was Dr. Elena Reyes, stood by the incubators, watching over the tiny, fragile forms within. She had made a promise to Kael'thar, and she intended to keep it. "They're growing," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "They're going to make it." Her colleague, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Captain Marcus Hale, nodded. He had been the one to lead the mission to Kael'thar's planet, and he had seen the devastation firsthand. He knew how much this meant. "They're going to have a future," he said, "thanks to us." Elena smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. She couldn't stop thinking about Kael'thar, about the sacrifice it had made. It had given everything to save its children, and now they would never know it. "We'll tell them," she said softly. "We'll tell them about Kael'thar, about their people. They'll know where they came from." Marcus nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They'll know," he said, "and they'll be proud." As the days turned into weeks, the Zyn'thari children grew stronger. Their tiny forms began to take shape, their scales shimmering with the same iridescence that Kael'thar's had once possessed. They were beautiful, fragile, and full of potential. Elena spent every moment she could with them, watching over them, talking to them, and singing to them. She wanted them to know that they were loved, that they were not alone. And as she watched them grow, she felt a strange sense of fulfillment. She had lost so much in her life, her family, her home, her world, but now she had found a new purpose. She had found a new family. The Zyn'thari children would grow up knowing that they were part of something bigger, that they were part of a legacy that stretched across the stars. They would know that they were loved, not just by the humans who had taken them in, but by the parent who had given everything to save them. And as they grew, they would carry Kael'thar's memory with them, a reminder of the sacrifice that had been made and the hope that had been born from it. Years later, on the anniversary of the day the Zyn'thari children had been brought to New Eden, the colony held a celebration. The children, now grown, stood together, their scales shimmering in the sunlight. They were strong, healthy, and full of life. Elena stood before them, her heart swelling with pride. She had,